suggestion be careful here, not tuck away.
Good thing we've got the police keep
Yeah.
under control.
Good afternoon. The crisis in the Middle East is extremely concerning. We're worried about the developments and the consequences of further escalation, including for New Zealanders. We acknowledge the developments of the last 24 hours, including President Donald Trump's announcement of US attacks on nuclear facilities in Iran. New Zealand continues to advocate for diplomacy and dialogue. Ongoing military action in the Middle East is extremely worrying, and it's critical further escalation is avoided. We strongly support efforts towards diplomacy and urge all parties to return to talks. Iran's nuclear activities have long worried New Zealand. We want Iran to comply with its international obligations. Our concern is that military and further military action is not going to deliver a sustainable solution to this problem. We're a long way from the region, but New Zealand will continue to convey these messages in favour of diplomacy and dialogue directly to Iran, Israel and the other parties involved in possible talks. Meanwhile, the government is committed to pursuing all options for assistance for New Zealanders stranded in Israel and Iran. Officials are working around the clock on these issues, and we have deployed a response team to the region. As part of that effort, we are today announcing the deployment of a C-130 Hercules aircraft to the region to stand ready to assist if needed. We're also in discussions with commercial airlines to see whether and how they might be able to assist. Airspace in Israel and Iran remains heavily restricted, so for now repatriation flights are not possible. But the situation is changing every day. This deployment means MFAT and the New Zealand Defence Force will be ready to support New Zealanders if the chance arises. The fact remains that reliable airspace reopenings across the region could be weeks away, and options are extremely limited while military attacks continue. That is why we continue to recommend New Zealanders in Israel and Iran do everything they can to leave now if they can find a safe route. Any New Zealanders that need assistance to leave Iran or Israel should contact MFAT immediately. These are messages we've repeated for a long time now. Now, Minister Collins will talk more about the deployment before we take any questions. Minister Collins.
Well, thank you, Minister Peters, and thank you everyone for coming today. But most of all, thank you to our New Zealand Defence Force personnel who are preparing to leave on this deployment. They exemplify the courage, commitment and integrity our people show day in, day out. They never hesitate to go where others are fleeing, whether on an international situation such as this one or in a domestic emergency where floodwaters are rising and people need to be rescued. We hope that our people in aircraft are not needed. The diplomatic efforts will prevail and the danger levels drop enough for New Zealanders in the Middle East to get themselves to a safer place. But we stand ready to help should it be needed, as we always have done and always will be. Who can ever forget the images of our old C-130H Hercules evacuating people in need from Kabul, Afghanistan? Those old workhorses have now been fully retired after 60 years service to New Zealand and New Zealanders, and in their place we have the bigger, better, faster C-130Js that you see behind us. However, it will take several days to get to the Middle East from Auckland, with wheels up scheduled for tomorrow. Airspace in Israel and Iran remains heavily restricted, which means getting people out by aircraft is not yet possible. But by positioning an aircraft and personnel in the region, we will be able to do more when airspace reopens. This is, as we all know, a fast-moving situation, and as I've said, we hope that we are not needed. But if we are, our people will be there, and they will, as always, do us proud. Happy to take some questions.
Does the government support the American strike?
Look, this has just happened. These are circumstances in which we will, first of all, gather the fact before and the circumstances before we give our opinion.
Do you think that it makes the situation more difficult, or it helps ease the conflict by the Americans taking this action?
As I say, we've just heard about this. The President of America made an announcement just after 2 o'clock this afternoon, New Zealand time. We're gathering the facts, and when we know what they are, we'll give you our opinions.
You had no warning that the US was going to make these attacks?
Of course we had no warning.
Do we have a latest update on how many New Zealanders are in Iran and Israel?
Well, the numbers just jumped in terms of Iran because we thought at a certain time we had them all counted out at 46. They're far more closer to 80 now because they're coming out of the woodwork, despite the fact that for months we said, look, this is a danger zone, and for a number of days we said, get out if you possibly can. There's no flights, there's no buses, there's no trains, there's no fuel. This is a crisis circumstance, and we're going to do our best, as the Minister of Defence Judith Collins has said, to get them out if we possibly can.
Would you consider having NZDF troops entering into that land to help the evacuations as they did in Kabul?
Look, we've got resources out there and 2 posts already outside of the terror zone, so to speak, in case people come across the borders. But getting across the border is the problem.
Are you able to confirm where the Hercules will be based in the region?
Well, we're not able to confirm that for security reasons, but we certainly do know that we have a base there.
And is it for New Zealanders only, or will it be like New Zealand residents and citizens, I mean, or will it be extended to their families who might not necessarily have residency?
Well, look, that's very difficult to say because you've got to make up your mind on the circumstances. Getting them to a more safe place, we're not bringing them home. We're getting them to where they can make arrangements to get home. But when we started out in New Caledonia recently, you recall, to get our people out, which was a massive effort, we ended up helping the people from 20 countries out. So you never know what you might have to do as a good citizen of the world.
Other than this repatriation mission, are there any other NZDF troops or assets stationed in the Persian Gulf?
Well, we do have some NZDF people in the region of the Middle East, but I really don't want to be able to say anything about quite where they are for the obvious security reasons.
Is that a recent deployment?
Well, we have people there ongoing in the Middle East, and so there's nothing much more I can say about that.
Mr. Peters, you mentioned around 80 now that you know of New Zealanders in Iran. What's the latest figure regarding Israel?
Well,
There's a few hundred, aren't there?
101. This figure was much lower, but as we've come to this crisis point, now the numbers are starting to jump. So
You said in your remarks just now about your level of concern and what has happened. So what has today's action meant for your level of concern for the New Zealanders who are still in that region?
well, our anxiety was enunciated and formulated into policy warnings and collection of views months ago. We've been saying it, and this is a sad circumstance here, but we said, look, this is potentially very dangerous, get out.
You said that New Zealand still had concerns about Iran's nuclear program. It's continued.
No, I didn't say that. I said we had concerns about it. We had concerns about it.
How do you view Iran's nuclear program now? Is it, as they say, meant only for peaceful purposes, or do you agree with the Americans?
No, look, with respect, we're going to find out the facts, and some of these questions are becoming rather, sadly, given the crisis of humanity there, academic.
Ahead of the NATO meeting,
If you don't mind me saying so.
ahead of the NATO meeting, if Crystal Luxon has the opportunity to speak with the US President, what would be the message from New Zealand to America?
Well, the first thing we'd want to do, both Judith and I, is discuss it with the Prime Minister before we tell the media what he should say.
But not in terms of your advice to him, but generally what would be New Zealand's message to America at a time like now?
Well, again, we both wanted to discuss with the Prime Minister what our latest information is, rather than go public and seek to communicate with them that way.
So then what can you tell us about the discussions you have been having with government officials from Israel, from Iran, and more so what you've been hearing from New Zealanders on the ground there in the region?
Well, the summation of it is that it's a crisis in a sense of great urgency. That's why we've got this plane all set to go. And we're making arrangements with private airlines, if we can possibly, if we have to use them as a utility, as a backup. So we're using all the resources we possibly can. We've got a proud record in this country. I mean, we had recently these upsettling events in New Caledonia, but we, got people out of Kabul, as Judith Collins said. We got a hostage out of West Papua after 500 days, and somebody out of prison to get an operation desperately needed in Thailand just recently, the last few days. These are positive things like New Zealand taxpayers should be proud of.
Mr. Peters, you worked in the foreign affairs area for a long time. How do you view the seriousness of this latest crisis compared to others that you've dealt with?
No, this is the most serious that I've ever dealt with. And it takes me to the Cuban Missile Crisis, the level of inflection we're talking about potentially. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.